Hey, it's Brian and Chris here from Resolve Technology, and today we're going to talk about work from home, specifically if you're VPNing into a network, you're using VPN, right? And you might be using something like remote desktop. And Chris knows from troubleshooting this for many of our work from home clients, they run into all types of issues. And Chris will start with the remote desktop application and take it away, Chris.
Yeah, so first and foremost, if you're connecting into your work network in the office, the corporate LAN from home, you need some way to authenticate into there. So what Brian's mentioning is you need a VPN in. Traditional VPNs like IPsec, SSL VPNs, FortiClient on a FortiGate, but you have to authenticate in. So you need to punch credentials in, and you'll need to be logged in and established on that with that connection. Also, for us, another option is something called Tailscale. And we have some clients that use this. Essentially, in the system tray here, you see this little pin pad. You'll see that some of the little dots in the pin pad are lit up. If I right click, you can see, okay, Christopher ResolveTech.biz, I'm signed in. You just need to be signed in and it should just keep you signed in. But one of the things we have is people are signed out or they didn't realize they're no longer signed in and they just try to go to their remote shortcut to their work computer, and they'll get an error message where it doesn't work. It'll just say could not reach computer. Another issue potentially is DNS, however DNS configured on the network there at their home. It might not find the computer name. You might need to use the IP of the work computer, but I'm not going to dive that much deeper into that. It's just like, that's typically what we would see from time to time. Another thing is Windows Defender firewall on the workstation. So, in this case, I'm not on a domain at home here, but there'd be domain networks. You may need to go in here and you'd need to find remote desktop. If remote desktop's not turned on, you wouldn't be able to remote desktop in. The Windows Defender firewall would block it. But whenever you're setting somebody up for remote access, you need to go into the system properties here and you'll see computer name, but there's a remote section. By default, it's going to say don't allow remote connections to this computer, but you're going to want to allow that and then select users, add, and you'll need to make sure that, it's the domain user name of the user trying to remote into the computer. They need to be in there. So once they're in there and that's checked, then you'd have a shortcut. So if I'm going to go ahead and search this remote desktop connection. So I already have this filled out. For a user, I'd save this onto their desktop. You can save it to see users public if it's multiple users remoting in from that device. So we'll go to desktop here. It's not there. What is it on OneDrive? And I just call it remote to work PC or something to that effect. And then see, here's the shortcut they click on. If you're using multiple monitors, you'd want to go under display here and use all monitors for remote session. For the case of testing here, I just want to do it on my main monitors to show you guys on the screen share. But if you ever have this, and you say a lot of people prefer, right, Brian, having 3 monitors or 2 monitors, they want to be remoted in as if they're in the office with all displays.
Right. So if it's set up in the proper fashion and you have the right internet connection, it's pretty seamless. Like during COVID, we set up a ton of people work from home in pretty crappy environments, and we managed to iron out a lot of things. Like Chris said, a big one is internet connection in your Wi-Fi. Typically, that's where we see the most problems, right? So Chris, for example, would run a consistent ping to make sure that there's not a lot of latency on the connection. And if there's latency, then we know it's not the remote desktop application or the VPN or whatever. It's most likely either the Wi-Fi connection internally or the internet service provider. The speed is just not fast enough. So
yeah,
go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so we're running a ping here. We saw like 1,000 milliseconds, 2,000 milliseconds, like they're on a hotspot. Then it might let them in, or it might fail to connect several times and then let them in once, but then instantly drop the connection. There's a few netsh commands you can do too I think it's this one here. This will show Wi-Fi settings for a Wi-Fi specific issue. Oh, I'm not connected to Wi-Fi, but you'd see the adapter and you'd see the connection strength. So like sometimes seeing the 3 bars or whatever the indicator is for Wi-Fi, sometimes that's not a accurate indication of the connection strength. So we'd run a command to verify that the signal strength's, decent. But now that we have this shortcut here, all I do is double click on it. You can check, don't ask me again. I'll choose connect. You can have it remember your password for security reasons. We usually don't have that checked. You just type in your credentials that you use to log into your work computer. So in my case, I'll type that in.
And one of the recommendations that we make, or what I should say, the requirements, is the VPN needs to have some sort of two-factor authentication, right? So
Yes.
whether that is through your firewall or some third-party application, like for us, we use Duo, right? And then you have to authenticate with your phone, for example, right?
Yeah.
So then you can get through this process, right? So it's connect to the VPN first, username, password, MFA, boom, then you're into the network, right? Purely. Then you do this step that Chris is talking about where you can remote desktop directly into your workstation at work. This is sort of like the poor man's version of, like, if you had a lot of people doing it, you'd either put this capability into the cloud on a server,
Yeah.
do it on premise. Like we'll set up a terminal, what used to be called terminal server, but remote desktop services. And then you don't need to go directly into the computer. You can go actually into the server. But this is a cheaper way to do it. Chris basically showed you the way to do it through a desktop and what kind of problems you would run into. But it's pretty seamless if you have the right connections.
Yeah. So also you'll notice this blue bar. You can hide this at the top, but this lets you know you're in your remote connection. But if I go ahead and do that, or you can also minimize it, and then you're back on the laptop or the whatever you're connecting in from home, and you'll see the little icon with the computer monitor here. Another thing we sometimes do is you say you don't want to have, there's something called smart sizing, and when that's checked, if I want to be in like both environments, I can make, you know what I mean? We can make this bigger, and I just want it to look like a browser window I have open. You know what I mean? With smart sizing. Then I'm in both environments here. Another thing you'll notice is, like I mentioned earlier with Tailscale, this is just the lab VM, but you'll notice that the pin pad's not lit up like on my desktop. And when you right click on it, it just says log in.
Yeah, so that's something to troubleshoot if you use in Tailscale, but a basic VPN will work with this setup. You don't have to use something like Tailscale. We do it in both environments. There's many ways you can set up the VPN connection, but Chris has just given you some basics and what to look for as far as troubleshooting. We'll close it up there, Chris.
Oh, there's one more thing we should probably say, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Now I'm going to close out of this, but if I go in here to properties, I see people do this a lot, and I didn't mention it earlier. If I go to edit, you can allow printers through and print, so it print from the printers tied to the device from the device that you're using as a jump box to remote into. It'll just say on your computer name, like the printer will show up from the original device that you're connecting from.
That's a good point. So to be more specific, like I've got a printer at home. I want to print from my computer at work that I'm remoted into directly to my printer at home. Check these settings that Chris is talking about, right?
Yeah,
Chris?
right here under printer. Yep. And then the big thing is, here's what the original point was, like, say you use Teams and you do meetings every morning with your colleagues. People so you're going to have to run Teams from your desktop, not from the RDP session, because it's not going to pass through the webcam and the microphone. So you'll be in Teams and they'll be like, why can't they hear me? Why can't they see me? You need to run it locally, not through the remote session.
That's a very good one, because during the pandemic, not so much nowadays, like everybody's adapted. But if we pick up maybe a new client and we're doing it's a new setup to them and they don't quite understand, they're new to work from home, they'll try to run Teams from the work computer remotely through the RDP session, and that doesn't work. Like Chris said, you need to run Teams locally on your home computer, right? Or your work laptop or whatever. We don't allow clients to use home computers, but your work laptop, right? And then not from the computer you're remoted into. All right, we'll close it out there, Chris, and maybe we'll have another video. We'll talk about some more specifics about work from home.
All right, have a good one.
All right, thanks, Chris.